Please join me again in thanking Alexandra Simpson. Thank you so much for being here with us and for this really extraordinary and unique film. Let's dive right in. I want to go back to something you said in your introduction, which is that it's a film about ghosts, which I think is an incredibly sort of provocative starting point to approach this film. And I think I think about a lot of the cinema that comes out of Florida. You know, Florida films, I think, often sort of inhabit this kind of uncanny or dreamlike space. Kind of a funhouse mirror energy seems to come out of depictions of that state in particular. And I'm curious if you could just speak about Florida as your subject and how that is related to this idea that it's a film inhabited by ghosts.
Well, the approach is, it's a very personal approach in the sense that I feel like I know Florida through only one prisma, which is the one that my father is from and showed to us. And for me, growing up, it was always this sort of like promise of a paradise, also because we would go in the summer times, and it was very ephemeral, because we would leave, and my father had always told us this place is going to go underwater. He's very like fatalist. And he's also older. He's the age of, he could be my grandfather. So I always associated me going there with his aging and just this whole place sort of disappearing. So that was, I've always knew that I had a very particular relationship to this small town in Florida. And when I can't speak of Florida because he never showed us Florida. It was only this town. And what's very specific about this place is that it's a beach town, and it's a string of beach towns, and they're related to Jacksonville, the city, by a bridge. But what happens there is very much sort of isolated. So that was another theme, isolation and sort of the solitude that can come with it. And when he saw the film, he was like, "This is not Florida. This is not Atlantic Beach. What did you do?" And I was like, well, "This is what I've felt going back older, but also this is a seed he planted in our head that this place is going to leave because it's so vulnerable to hurricanes." I can't say that. I mean, there's so much beauty in Florida just because of how wild it is, and I think that there's a sort of a, not an absurdity, but a strangeness in civilization being put there, and maybe that makes for such weird films set in Florida, but my approach was extremely biased just by my limitation of my knowledge of this place, and I kept it that way.
I want to ask you about the process of scripting the film and sort of if you could describe to us sort of step by step. I think with an ensemble film like this, it can sometimes be mysterious, this sort of chicken and egg problem, which came first, the characters or the setting or the story. And can you just speak to us about how you created what I experienced this film like a tapestry. It's like telling a story, but not in a sort of a conventionally linear way. How did you build or sort of accrue this story?
The approach was always about showing a place and showing people in a place at a very specific moment, which is a moment of vulnerability and a moment of weight. And there's many ways to go about this moment. That's what I've understood from living through them, which is the approach of a hurricane, but also just speaking to people around that. And I felt like to make this film, it needed to be a multifaceted approach. And I felt instantly very freed from the linear sort of arc of characters. Okay, psychologizing, they have a past, a present, a future. It was really about seizing them in this moment and thinking about ways in which people wait, and thinking about mundanity juxtaposed with existentialism. And the casting was, I went there before finalizing the script, and I needed to talk to people, meet people, so I auditioned for 2 months, a bunch of people, and it was giving me ideas from like the BMX rider who came up to me like, if you need a background BMX, like think of me. It's like, this could be very interesting just to have this in the background. But then also just having the main characters, even though they don't have a full arc, helped me finalize the script. And it's funny because they're all very much isolated from each other. There's no connection, but I feel like they really rely on each other in a narrative aspect. So until I had everyone in mind, which was probably a week before we shooted, it was such a nebulous exploration in the writing process.
Did you, once you had compiled this cast of actors / characters, was it a collaborative process to sort of tease out who these people were and what did that collaboration look like?
I would say it was collaborative because so we had the lines, we would rehearse before the scene, but if it didn't feel right, it didn't feel right. And so I would ask the actors, how does this sound, or like, and they would propose stuff. And actually, one of the actors, Jordan, who plays a stand-up comedian, is here, and they were very creative in their. They didn't need to know much because it was very much about the moment. And it was as silly as like for the motel scene, we need to understand, okay, you're talking about your daily lives, and you work at a hotel, I had written stuff. Some of it felt right, some didn't, and we would just understand together by going through the scenes how to like get to something that felt not forced and very intimate. And that was a process with everyone. For example, for the storm chaser, he'd never been on camera, and he's like a very shy person, and the way we found his ease was using his jargon of storm chasing. And we didn't know that until we were with him, and that was his sort of pillar. And so for each character, we were very attentive to what they were comfortable with. And in that sense, it was collaborative, yeah.
I think one of the effects of this process is that the film sort of marries this really stylized approach to crafting images of this space and these people, and really precisely composed and lit sort of tableaus of this setting. But at the same time, there's really a documentary texture to it in the sort of locations that you're shooting in the way in which you frame and sort of give space for your performers to be themselves. And was that a challenge, balancing this sort of highly composed quality with this naturalism that feels very almost documentary?
That wasn't a challenge as much as crafting a film that would be a fiction, but that would be abstract. So I'm not really answering your question, but the way we composed the image was, okay, we had our references, but it was very much relying on the locations that we wanted to shoot. And these were locations that, I mean, that was the premise of this film for me, was to capture these locations that are going to go away, not only due to maybe climate vulnerability, but also just mass gentrification, mass modernization. So it was all about location. So in that sense, it wasn't challenging. It was actually very coherent. But what was very challenging for me when I was writing and when we came onto the set was understanding how to create a narrative within a need for abstraction. Because again, it was about showing these places and these people in this very specific moment. Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to push further on that because I think one of the sort of miracles of this film is that very little happens in the sense of traditional sort of definitions of action. It's very much a film about waiting, about anticipation and uncertainty and sort of this limbo state. But it's incredibly gripping, and I think in the same way that people watching can just be the most fascinating way to pass time, I think the film holds the viewer's attention so effectively. And I'm curious, how do you find drama within boredom and idleness? And just, because it seems like a paradox, but it's so, is it a matter of timing and rhythm?
Well, I like what you say about people watching, because one of my notes to myself and to my producer was I want to make a film about people watching people, from a need for connection and from a need for, I don't know, for something that comes from alienation. And so that was on my mind, of course. But in terms of editing, there were many moments in the edit room where I was like, okay, this is going to be the pace. This is going to be challenging in terms of sticking to the film. And it relied a lot on sound design, on paying attention to what happens on the actors' faces. Like, one of my favorite scenes is when the woman, Margaret, she doesn't have a name in the film, her name on the script is Margaret, gets fired, and she walks on the parking lot and she sees a person who just fired her in his car. That, to me, those like little blissful moments are what inspire me. So I didn't feel like going for films that are, at least for first feature, for films that are scripted, because sometimes I'm a little bit allergic to reading a scenario. It was about moments, and I was very comforted by filmmakers who do this. So I was rewatching the early Jim Jarmusch, Chantal Ackerman's films, and I was like, yes, this is a cinema that is allowed, and I can go in this direction. Yeah, did I answer your question?
It's perfect. You mentioned sound, and I'm so sort of enthralled by the sound design in this film. It feels poetic, really, the way you sort of layer these different sonic textures to create these soundscapes. And could you speak a bit about that and how you wanted to use sound? And in particular, I'm curious about the radio broadcasts and where those came from.
Well, sound, I like to say, and it's very true, that the film starts with sound for me. I mean, the desire to make a film in Florida in the summer, I mean, this is late summer, but starts from my nostalgia for the sound of these afternoon storms. It's a very specific sound. And so from there, I was working with the sound recordist on set, and I was telling him, this is my nostalgia, and this is what we could go for. This is the cicadas, the wind in the trees, the storms, and the radio. Not only do you hear the radio all over when there's a storm approaching, a hurricane approaching, but even when there's not, like, you go to a restaurant, you go to the restroom, and you hear the coastal radio all the time. There's something about climate that is so on people's minds, and it goes through sound. And the climate, the radio, the meteorology is always somewhere in the soundscape. So this was material that I gathered from online sources. It wasn't something we actually got there, but it was crucial to have that if I was going to make a film about this place. And then I think I have to talk about the music as well, because something that makes it feel ghostly, in my opinion, is how the music echoes. So it starts from within. You understand that someone is listening to this, and there's a moment that they just linger into this melody that they're listening to, and then it just sort of takes over onto the landscape. And that was I've always loved sort of echoing music in the background. I mean, it's so simple, but it's highly emotional, and that was the other sort of note I had to myself, was the music from the next door, or music from that parking lot, or yeah.
I want to leave time for a couple of audience questions, but first I just have to ask about what you were thinking about in terms of this film's relation to climate change, and in terms of sort of a political position, or not necessarily even political, but just sort of an experiential film about climate change. On the one hand, it's about a potential extreme weather event and how these individuals, in a very real sense, are reacting to that. But also, it gave me the feeling of sort of gesturing at what we all experience as we wait for climate change to continue to take effect. And was that sort of allegorical framing something that you were really going for?
Yeah, it's very much a film about stagnation, and stagnation in face of a form of chaos. And in my opinion, the chaos is not even just the climate; it's also just the modernization. Let's call it this way. But what appeals to me in making a film in this place is the way in which people deal with this climate crisis in a place that is the most vulnerable to it is not what we would think. That there is such a mundanity in it, because it's like, yeah, this is what it is. We're not going to leave for this. But there's also such a sort of resilience. And I guess that's what I wanted to show with these characters, especially the ones that are in movement, is a form of resilience within chaos. And it's one that I don't have we're all going through this, and some don't even, especially people in Florida, some don't even believe in climate change. They put it on God. So for me, it was about understanding how do people who are the most affected by it, how do they live through this? What is it? And to me, it's unexpected behaviors, whether it's stagnation, waiting, being completely stuck and powerless, from let's do something, from I asked once to a woman, like, what did you do during like Hurricane Irma? And she was like, oh, I put my finest shoes on, I put a helmet on, and I was drinking my favorite wine. And I was like, I don't know if this is true. It probably isn't, but there's a place for dream in there that I allowed myself to go towards, because it is there even in chaos. And yeah, it's maybe soothing for myself too. Maybe there's a need to soothe myself from what we're all going through, I guess. Yeah,
It's therapeutic.
I don't know if it's therapeutic, but yeah.
If we have time for one or two audience questions, I think, if you raise your hand. I see a hand in the back there. The mic will be right there.
Hello. As someone from Florida, I feel like a lot of the music and songs that were in the film somewhat perfectly capture Florida's essence and its almost mythic qualities, especially near the beginning of the film where the two characters are driving to Philly. You use a song by Yves Tumor, which is a song I have a lot of memories with. I was just wondering if you could maybe elaborate more on what that process was like in choosing the right sounds to create this world within your film.
Thank you so much for that question. I really appreciate it, because the music in Florida, or the way I hear it, is always coming from cars, golf cars. It's like it's always around you, or on the beach. There's always a radio with music, and it's always this like specific soft rock, optimistic, modern country music that really gets to me. It really does, and probably because it's very nostalgic for me, but there is a form of optimism in the music that people listen to in Florida. I don't know how to put it any other way. As for like the Yves Tumor tracks and ML Book, which is much more like, I don't know, like modern and like today, it came with like, again, a need for restfulness that didn't necessarily have to do with my association for Florida, at least for this track, for the Yves Tumor track. It was very much a moment of like, we're entering this meditative state, and like, how can that lead you within that? But it's one of the moments where I actually don't associate to the music I hear in Florida, and it's one of the moments where I take liberty of like, oh, this is becoming extra diegetic. But the rest of the music, really, it needed to feel like it was coming from within. Like the guy at the truck smoking a cigarette, he could be listening to this right now.
I see one in the middle right here. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for this wonderful movie. It reminds me, because I visited Florida back in 2020, right after the election, and then the hurricane hit, which completely messed up my holiday plan. But I think your film really captured this kind of strange quality of Florida. My question is, there's a lot of use of TV footage and other media, radios, in the movie, and we see games, sports games, and I think there's even like a couple frames of young Sheldon on TV. So I'm wondering, like, what's your decision picking, like, which to show, what kind of media to show in your films, and you know, what's the rationale behind that?
Yeah, it's funny because when I think of the film, I feel like it's so not. I forget that it's showing as many screens. I always think, oh, this is such a like yesterday movie because it doesn't show like social media and everything. But now that you mention this, maybe this is my sort of outsider view of. I should mention I never lived in the U.S. until like a year ago, and something about screens being everywhere, including in this room where people get fired and there's a football match playing in the background. That's something that I'm not used to. So that's a part of depiction of an American town to me. It strikes me. And as for the I don't know the word you use for the media, but are you referring to like the footage of the storm that we see that's super digital?
Like everything else, like whether it's sports, TV shows, or the
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I maybe it's not faithful, but in my mind and in my understanding of Atlantic Beach, there's always sound from a TV or radio, and there is always TV everywhere. Like you go in bars, sometimes there's 10 TVs. So I mean, it's not a decision where you're like, okay, how do I depict America? It's just one of these things that comes back to you because I know this town very well, and yet it strikes me because when I come back, it's like an emotional thing, and it comes back on the page, I guess, and that's the best response I can give you. It's probably the outsider point of view, like, oh, America.
I think we can take one more. Yep, there's a hand right in the middle there.
Firstly, let me join the gentleman. Thank you for the movie. It's a beautiful, beautiful movie, and I haven't seen such in a very long time, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
And my question is around the fact that you tried to emphasize the calamity, the magnitude of what's coming through a very diminutive sort of string of rhythmic scenes that develop. And the question is, did you do that as a film technique, as something you wanted to actually affect, magnify the calamity by diminuting the other side, or is it just the way you experienced it?
It's both. I'll say that this threat, this sort of pending doom. First of all, I'll say also that when I was dreaming this film up, I really didn't know where it was going, but I wanted to talk about a sense of doom. I'd seen Paranoid Park, and there was a monologue that the kid gives that's talks about like the possibility of an outside world, and it was so pure and doomful. That's probably not a word, but there was a sense of doom that has always touched me, and I became very conscious to want to work with this. And as for the threat, I mean, to be honest, it's the only sort of narrative element of the film, right? So it's just that thing that just keeps you telling, okay, there is an element that puts everybody in the same position, because we're all going through this when this happens, and that's been my experience. And then I guess for example, with the storm footage, which came in later in the edit for me, I had such an emotional reaction to it. I really saw it turning into something biblical almost, that's just like higher than life, and that I felt like I was understanding the storm chaser who I'd spent a lot of time with before getting into this. I felt like I was understanding his like compulsion towards it just by seeing this footage and experiencing it, and I needed this sort of bigger than life biblical proportion to play with rhythm, but also just like actually make it powerful, make it real, because it is real. It's not just like it's not just like a suspenseful element of the film. I mean, it's very unsuspenseful. Nothing really happens with the storm, but yeah, just bigger than life.
I'm sorry to say that's all the time we have, but thank you all, and thank you so much, Alexandra.
Thank you so much for staying. Thank you.